Good morning or good afternoon, everyone, wherever you are. Welcome to my channel, Conversations with Rivera. Today, I am thrilled to have a second interview on the high cost of medicine with two distinguished panelists. As you know, last time I did an interview with young medical students on why prices are so high and the lack of transparency in the pharmaceutical industry. And so today we're going to talk about what some other individuals are doing on keeping the prices down, but they are doing it through legal means and an extensive amount of lobbying. So my first guest is Dr. Wilbert Vandenberg. He is a public health physician with 35 years experience of providing long-term and short-term technical assistance and consultancy support to governments and civil society and pharmaceutical systems, strengthening medicine policy development and implementation and monitoring and evaluation in low and middle income countries like Africa, Central Asia, and the Caribbean. He has broad experience in a number of countries such as the African region, Ethiopia, Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, Burundi, Rwanda, Sudan, Malawi, Zimbabwe, Lesotho, and the list goes on. And Tahir Amin is a founder and executive director of Initiatives for Medicines, Access and Knowledge, IMAC for short. It's a nonprofit organization working to address structural inequities on how medicines are developed and distributed, and has over 25 years experience in intellectual property law, during which he practiced with two of the leading IP firms in the United Kingdom and served as IP counsel for multinational corporations. His work focuses on reshaping IP laws and related global political economy to better serve the public interest by changing the structure, power dynamics that allow health and inequities to persist. And one of the reasons I think I'm glad to have both of them is because Tahir provides a perspective from the US and Dr. Vandenberg provides the perspective from Europe. So the title of our webinar is How Much is Too Much? And it seems that pharmaceutical companies and some medicines make an incredible amount of profit. Dr. Vandenberg, can we start off with you and say, how is that? And what are you doing in the Netherlands and Europe to bring that down?
Yeah, after 35 years of trying to get people access to affordable essential medicines, which are in principle very affordable and cheap, I'm now, since the last 5 years, working for this Pharmaceutical Accountability Foundation, which is trying to make access to expensive medicines better. What we are seeing in the last 20 years is a kind of a new epidemic, that new medicines that come with monopolies like patents or orphan drug status, or they are the only one in the market, their price is actually getting through the roof. And it is basically, even in the Netherlands now, come to a point that our Minister of Health says that we can't afford that. We have a solidar system. We all pay contributions through taxes or our premiums. But at one point, enough is enough. In the Netherlands, you may make a profit as a pharmaceutical company. You may make a lot of profit. However, you're not allowed to make excessive profits. That is in the competition law, but that actually does not work so well because it's only trying to actually calculate whether the excessive profit is after it has already happened. So what we are trying to do is to try and stop drug companies actually from being allowed to ask so much that they actually get super high prices.
Well, but the real question is, what is it enough? Like, for example, you indicated at one time that some of the profits are 78%.
Yes. Well, there is no guideline, one enough is enough. If you see what the case that we have actually brought to court is Rivera, which made globally $208 billion turnover. And we have done an analysis of their financial year reports. They've admitted that they spent about 11% on R&D. There's 11% also on the cost. So the actual gross profit is 78%. Now, what is a reasonable profit? We took guidance from the European Commission, who made a deal with a drug company, Aspen Pharmacare, in a competition case, and there they said 24% is a fair profit. So we did the 1% more. We said 25%. So that means that still that 53% of what Humira has turnover is, in our view, excessive profit. And well, there are only three industries, sectors in the world that make such a lot of profit. The pharmaceutical industry, the IT, and the banking, they sit average around 20-25%. Normal industries are happy if they make 5%. So if a drug company makes 78% profit on a product, I think there's definitely something wrong. And as society, we cannot do much. There's no law in the Netherlands that prevents you from asking so much profit. So we had to take another route and file a court case to ask if the judges thought that enough is enough.
Well, I think, Tahir, being an IP lawyer, it seems that these patents are what allows the pharmaceutical companies to keep charging because they're the only ones who can produce the medicine. It isn't until the medicine goes generic that the prices come down, right?
Typically, yeah. I think there's a study by the FDA that if you get anywhere between 5 to 6 generic producers, the prices can drop anywhere between 70 to 90%. But the branded pharmaceutical companies are obviously going to try and stall any competition from coming in for as long as possible. And one of the key tools that they use to do that is the patent system. Certainly when we look at, if we're talking about Humira or Humira, depending on how you pronounce it and where in the world you are, AbbVie's main primary patent, which is the one on the antibody, should have expired in 2016, or it did expire in 2016. However, they had loaded up their patent portfolio by our count. We did a study. It's available on our website, and the data is also available on our website in a database called the Drug Patent Book. And we found that AbbVie had filed 311 applications, of which over 160 had been granted, some of them extending patent protection until as far out as like 2036. Now, AbbVie didn't realize all that patent protection, but they leveraged all those patents in litigation. 11 companies tried to forge their way into the market through litigation. All of them settled because it was just way too costly for them to litigate through all these patents. I think AbbVie threw, in some cases in litigation, at least between 60 to 80 patents at these companies. Now imagine, and you're a lawyer too, Rudy, it costs over $1 million to litigate each of these patents. I've spoken to a biosimilar company that has tried to enter the market and will be doing so soon. And they told me that they spent just alone in litigating these patents $40 million, which is nearly well over a quarter of how much it actually costs them to actually bring their biosimilar to market. So you could see that these patent gains pay off. And what's really interesting about Humira and AbbVie's case is actually they made most of their profit after their main patent expired. There's a New York Times article which I'd helped the journalist to write on background, and AbbVie made $114 billion between 2016 and 2022 when the first biosimilar entered in 2023. So these patent gains really do pay off. And what's also not being talked about is in those settlements, the companies are paying royalties back to AbbVie until 2027. So they're making money still on all those patents. So we have a system that incentivizes this kind of behavior. And so when, Wilbert says, when is enough, when is enough? I think enough is when the first patent stops.
That's a good point. I heard one of your colleagues, Dr. Brandenburg, that talked about India, where India at one point didn't recognize the patents. And so you had all these generic drugs that were able to get on the market and significantly drop the price from 20,000 a year to significantly less. But Tahir, the question I have for you on the patents is, are they really the new patents or the extensions of the patents, are they really bettering the drug, or are they just minor changes?
So one of the things that the pharmaceutical industry, and I think even just the entire political economy of the pharmaceutical system, it's you say the word innovation, and I feel, and perhaps people may disagree with me, is people just stop having a conversation. The moment they hear the word innovation, nobody questions anything. And the thing is that when you start to really look at these patents, it's something that we do. It's not a job that I recommend everyone do because it's a rather laborious task. But when you start looking at them, when we looked at all AbbVie's patents on Humira, the first few patents that they filed, the main patents that were supposed to expire in 2016, they already laid out the types of indications that this particular invention could actually treat, such as rheumatoid arthritis, ankylosing spondylitis. Those indications were already mentioned in the first patent, but yet 7-8 years later, they filed another patent saying, oh, well, we're going to dose it at 40 milligrams. And what you're doing is you're already extending it out. And they call these innovations. Sure, they maybe have some utility, but utility is not the only sole requirement to get a patent in any country in the world. You have to show it's novel, non-obvious. You describe the invention fully. We have a system now that basically allows you to make these little increments in changes, and then basically add another 7-year protection, and the value of that is $114 billion. Why wouldn't you do it? It's easier to pay $30,000, $40,000 or whatever it is to file a patent application in the United States, and then it's going to cost someone millions of dollars to litigate it. It's a great return. It's the best game in town, and the lawyers are happy too.
The lawyers are happy, right? In the IP world, I've talked to a number of my colleagues who are in-house counsel, and you get to a point where unless your patent or IP infringement is within a certain amount, you don't go after the people. But the pharma companies seem to have a much harder lock on it because the profit is so high that they'll spend the money, I guess, in each country to fight the patent. Dr. Vandenberg, your system in Europe is different than ours. I mean, ours is the insurance company says yes or no, or only pays a certain amount. I know, for example, some cancer medication, the copay is $250, but you go to GoodRx and it's $50 at one pharmacy. And when you go through it, you see all these exorbitant prices. Explain a little bit to those who are in the US how it works in Europe, and why is it still a problem in Europe when people, I use the word socialized medicine, and it's very broad, but how is that affected?
Okay, yeah, we have European Union has one regulator, the European Medicines Agency, so they decide whether a drug is effective, safe, and good quality. There's no discussion. But after that, the drug companies have to go to each of the 27 EU member states, or 26 now, sorry, and they have to negotiate a price. And this is a national competence because of countries have very different healthcare and insurance systems. So in the Netherlands, the country I know best, we have a solidar system. So there is one insurance that everybody has to get. So private insurance companies have to actually provide that package that the government actually decides to all the patients. They can't refuse patients either. So it's very important for drug companies to get into that basic package. Before you get into that, you have to send a reimbursement dossier with a proposed price, and you have to prove that the drug that you are proposing is cost effective. Now, increasingly what we are seeing is that drug companies don't use what we would like to see, a cost plus pricing system, but they ask for value-based pricing, which is whatever the market can bear. And this can go up to now the highest number is now $3.5 million for one injection. And that is actually increasingly becoming a problem even for the government. The government has now in the Netherlands refused 3 products that are not going to be reimbursed in our basic healthcare system because the drug companies asked an unreasonable price and were unwilling in negotiations to lower the price. And for some of these, we have alternatives like pharmacists in the Netherlands are shielded from infringement on competition on patents, so they can actually still make a medicine even though the product is patented. So, sorry. So there are possibilities to then still have access to the product, but of course it's a problem. Patients need a product. Sorry. And but the government is basically saying that it is untenable, the system. So we have to actually get a different system that actually has a reasonable price. So what our Pharmaceutical Accountability Foundation is proposing to stick to a definition of the World Health Organization is called fair medicine price. That is actually the cost plus, so the cost of the R&D, the production, the distribution, and so on, plus then a fair profit, which you can discuss, but I think 25% is already quite high. And then they also still allow money for the company to do new innovative research. So that is, I think, quite generous from society. So that is called a cost plus plus model. That is not yet a legal requirement, and our foundation is campaigning for making that a legal requirement. For that to be working, you also need to actually have then legally enforceable transparency. There we are supported by another World Health Organization resolution 2019 that drug companies should actually be transparent about the cost of the medicines and their R&D that they're doing. And finally,
what happens, doctor, if the government says, no, we're not going to pay for this medicine? Is that acceptable?
It is. There's negotiations first on the technical details, and then our Health Technology Agency will then actually recommend to the government saying the drug is effective, but the price they are asking is too much, so please go and negotiate. And then there is a special waiting room called the sluice, in which the drug companies and the Ministry of Health then negotiate. And if they get to an agreement, normally, it's kind of a secret deal that they will then have given 20, 30, 40% discount. The price that is negotiated is kept secret, because other countries in Europe would also like to know how little we pay in the Netherlands, but so that's a problem in that situation. But then the drug can come to the market. But now, in 3 cases, the discussion has collapsed with the industries, as the industries wanted to have too much money. And so the government has decided now this drug is not going to be put in the basic insurance package, which means that patients will not get access based on from their insurance. So.
Well, Tahir, to me, in the United States, from your point of view, we seem to be like the wild, wild west on this thing. It seems to be, from what Dr. Benenberg is saying, somewhat regulated in a sense. It has to be a more concerted effort to get the medicine approved. But in the United States, there seems to me, based on what I've read, is a lack of transparency in what the cost really is.
Yeah, no, it's. I mean, I'm from the United Kingdom, and I've lived in the US for 17 years. So I feel I've learned a fair bit over the last 17 years about the health systems here. And to be honest with you, I still don't understand it. It's there are so many moving parts. You've got the drug companies who are setting the price, and then you've got these things called the pharmaceutical benefit managers, these middlemen who are dipping their beaks to make their share, and they do these rebates. And so the drug companies will jack up the price even more just to offset the rebate so that they're all making money. Only just recently, actually, the Biden administration has introduced the Inflation Reduction Act. And it's the first time in the United States, which is kind of surprising when you think of the rest of the industrialized Western world has been negotiating drug prices. for however long. The United States, for the first time, is introducing negotiation of drug pricing, and everyone is waving their arms in the air as it's like this is going to be the death knell of drug development. I mean, it's crazy. You said sort of Wild Wild West. I think you have capitalism in Europe, but I think in the United States you have cowboy capitalism. It's like basically you do whatever you like, and that is the pharmaceutical system here. It's the fact that we don't know how much companies are paying. I know Wilbert was saying that the prices in the Netherlands are also kept confidential, but at least it's being negotiated on behalf of the public. The problem here is a cultural one in the United States, I feel. Wilbert makes a point like the government will say, well, we're not going to pay that price unless you bring it down, and then it won't be prescribed, i.e. to the insurance. The argument I hear here in the United States all the time when that is, they say, well, we don't want to be like Europe, or we don't want to be like the United Kingdom, where NICE negotiates these prices, because I want my freedom. I want to have the freedom. Freedom is such a big loaded word. I want my freedom to be able to get whatever drug I like. And in Europe, they don't have that freedom. And so I think about that and I understand that. But the question I ask is where's your freedom if you can't afford the drug that you want?
Well, that's the problem. And there's Biden, I think, introduced some new legislation that insulin now for seniors is going to be $35, going to be a cap on what you have to pay for insulin, I believe. And putting caps on some of the medicine, especially for people who are Medicare, would probably be necessary. When I think of the question, how much is too much? I don't think you can put a number on it. I mean, it's a conflict between capitalism and in some sense socialism, but I would argue, I guess in a lawyer type general way that's adaptable, is when people can't afford it, that's when it's too much. I mean, that's the answer, right? You can't say, well, they should only make 25%. They should only make 10%. 30% or whatever. I think you have to look to when people can't afford to buy the drug. We had this crazy guy in the US, Keiko, who raised the cost of $700 a pill for people. And then he, blatantly said, well, my shareholders are happy. I don't really care about the people that we're treating. That's the issue. Dr. Vandenberg, but tell us this lawsuit that you filed in the Netherlands. I mean, you use humanitarian arguments. You used anti-competition. Can you tell us how you went about this lawsuit?
Okay, there was a discussion in Parliament last month whether there should be maximum to the profits that pharmaceutical companies should be allowed. That's what some parliamentarians asked, and the health minister said, well, I don't know how to do that because there's no law allowing me to put a maximum. So the lawyers amongst you will know that there is the competition law has you're not allowed to make misuse of your economic power position. We did file our first case 5 years ago of a drug company that had a medicine that cost only 28 cents, and they increased the price 500 times for not good reasons other than making just many more profits. And that was actually fined by the competition authority, but only after 3 years of negotiations and studying. So now we have taken on the biggest product before Corona globally, and also in the Netherlands. We paid 2.3 billion euros for that product till 2018 when the price came down after patents expired. The case you can make only is saying that this 2.3 billion, if there was an excess profit of 53%, which we have actually calculated, in fact, using the data of AbbVie itself, and those that were given to the US Congress in the study by Congress about this product. The 53% is 1.2 billion. That money has already been paid by our healthcare insurers to AbbVie, to the shareholders. And that's money that has left the health system. And as we have a maximum cap on the system in the Netherlands, it means that 1.2 billion could not be used for other treatments or other health interventions. So you have displaced that money. So if you, as a company, knowingly ask excess profits, and you know that's going to be taken from a pot that's limited in healthcare, you're actually denying other Dutch people from getting access. And we've calculated the 1.2 billion euros. That's actually the same as 16,300 qualis. In lay terms, that means that 1,300 people actually could not live a year longer in good health, thanks to that money that was taken by AbbVie.
I think
So
that's
we
a good
think that
argument.
is,
Yeah, I think that's a good argument, Doctor, because
and
you can say, I can't afford it, but what you're really saying is this high cost of medicine is stymieing or hindering the acquisition of medicine or treatments in other areas because it's bankrupting the system. Would be fair to say that?
And so our argument then is that we use the legal principle of tort, so that companies, if there is no law forbidding something, but everybody in society thinks that something is not justifiable or unreasonable, you can ask the court, and you have to bring a lot of evidence, that's what we did, to actually say why it was not right. And it's not right because patients in the Netherlands have the right to health. They have a human right to access to medicine. And the companies also have a duty of care. They must actually make sure that their patients get products that they control. There's nothing wrong with the Rivera drug. That's not the point. The point is that the company, by making such an high excess profit of 53%, which actually globally would be $110 billion, yeah, so of which most of that has been gained in the US, probably, Tahir. So your job is even much bigger than ours.
I think it is bigger, yes. What about an antitrust argument, Tahir?
That is
kind of competition, right? Stymie competition.
Well, interestingly, in Humira is a drug that you use against rheumatoid arthritis. So there were 3 products in that category that have been, well, not really competing. I mean, Pfizer had Enbrel and Remicade from MSD. They actually all kept their prices at the same level in Europe for many years, and there was no visible competition. Actually, we can be glad in Europe because in the US, the companies actually together actually increased the prices. I think, was it 37 times? And AbbVie and Pfizer actually went exactly every year 5-7% up. So that to me smells like a cartel. But yeah, I don't know how the good US laws are to actually tackle that. In the Netherlands, we had the same price, but even then, we think that you're not allowed to make misuse of your economic power position. Because when the price was reasonable, maybe in 2004, with 3,500 patients and costing 11,000 euros per person per year, AbbVie in the end had 28,000 patients because they had many more diseases or indications covered and many more patients. So normal economy of scales would allow you then to lower the price. So maybe the government has also not been doing its job properly by renegotiating, but definitely the company made use of its power position by keeping that profit nicely until finally the patents expired in Europe, and through a deal that AbbVie made with the biosimilar companies in Europe we got much lower prices, but in the US the prices went even up more till this year. So
Tahir, well, let me ask Tahir though, what do you think of what do you have to say on that? And what do you think of the antitrust argument?
Well, there was an antitrust case that was brought in the US, and interestingly, one of the arguments that was part of that action was that AbbVie had used patent abuse and thickets to kind of be for anti-competitive reasons, and the judge said, yeah, they got 132 patents, but what's wrong with that? The system allows it. And the antitrust laws in the United States have been stripped away they've been gutted over the last 40 years because of neoliberal policies and economics. If you look at the 70s leading up into the 80s, when IP systems became sort of pretty much the bar just kind of dropped. It was all about incentivizing investment, and it became like private capital's kind of fiefdom. The courts and the antitrust world used to look skeptically at patents and how they were used for anti-competitive reasons. That doesn't exist anymore. And I think it's high time that, and I think it's slowly happening, that the FTC and that's the Federal Trade Commission for our European listeners, and the Congress needs to really look at the antitrust laws, because I think at the moment the way the antitrust laws work, it's in deference to intellectual property laws. So really, you have to ultimately fix the private property system, which is intellectual property, first, before antitrust can really rein it in. Or you kind of say, if you loaded up 100 odd patents to kind of keep competition off, and we know there's a game going on here, antitrust laws can say that's a monopolistic practice. But the thing is, though, I think culturally in the United States, it has a huge problem with that, because of the underpinnings of the Constitution and private property as what determines this kind of behavior. The moment you take something away from a pharmaceutical company, litigation starts and the Constitution gets cited. It's the takings laws and all this other stuff. So really, that Congress really needs to figure this out, because the system is actually heading in a dire situation at the moment. It's like more. And you said, like, what's enough is like, you talk about shareholders. Again, if you look at the policies, the financialization of the pharmaceutical industry over the last 40 years, they're not really looking at what the patient benefit is. They're looking at, how can I do life cycle management, keep the franchise of a blockbuster drug going for as long as possible so that I can keep the returns going. I can understand from a CEO, that's all that matters. It's not like what healthcare benefits I'm bringing. I'm not doing the deeper R&D to bring in a product to market that potentially could actually solve a medical need that is not currently being met. I am going to say, I've got a blockbuster drug, I'm going to come up with a third, fourth, 50th indication of that same drug. And that's not real R&D. But they're making mint over that. They're making huge amounts of money. And we've incentivized this over the last 40 years. I say we as a society, our politicians, our policymakers, our economists.
But it's always been the argument that the pharmaceutical companies pay $2 billion to put a new drug on the market, and nobody really seems to know the breakdown of what those costs are. I would imagine some of it is marketing, some of it is a lot more than just R&D. And they're putting that into one number. But here in the US, when you have insurance companies that say, no, we're not going to allow that drug, can they put a stop to it? When they can say, no, it's too high, we're not going to pay for it. I realize there are the co-pays and, the patients have to live with those. But Ned Ashtari, who I interviewed a while back, said sometimes that is a good thing, because the insurance companies can kind of control that. What do you think?
Well, I think that's where the sort of, that's why the convoluted system that exists. You've got the PBMs, the middlemen who negotiate on behalf of the insurers and what have you. The insurance companies do have some power. I think the employers have huge amounts of power, because you think about the United States system, in a way, you only get really, your insurances if you're employed. Typically, if you're not employed, it's kind of bizarre in a way. It's almost like saying your health is only valuable if you're actually in the working force. You're in the workforce. If you're a person who's not in the workforce, no one cares about your health in the United States. That to me is astonishing.
Well, unless you're on Medicaid.
Unless you're Medicaid or Medicare, but the thing is that even then, there's also,
you got to be old for that. I mean,
you got to be old, or you've got to be
Medicaid. Yeah.
Or you've got to be basically on the lower income level. I mean, so if you're in the middle classes where you kind of cut in the between, you might have a lower paying job or something. For me, it just seems to me that the entire system is built to exclude in the United States.
You don't even recognize human rights in the US.
And we have to be self-reflective about these things, because there is this thing of idea that like we have everything right. Nobody's got everything right. Not in Europe, even not in the United States. And this ability to be introspective about what kind of systems we're setting up is the fundamental issue here. I've lived around the world. I've seen health systems around the world. I've seen laws around the world. I'm not vouching for one over the other, but you've got to look at it in its basic principles. And, the American exceptionalism when it comes to healthcare is the problem. It has to look at itself and say, we are not serving our public.
Well, Susan says obtaining health insurance in the US is expensive. The government is slashing Medicaid right now. So it is a problem. I mean,
It is, because you've got the
insurance-
Republicans who are saying you have to work X number of hours if you're going to even get those you've been paying your pensions, you'll be paying your taxes, what have you. And the other thing is that even in these kind of Medicare programs, they're even privatizing aspects of that, like Medicare Advantage or Medicaid. It's a problem. It's a problem that we're privatizing everything. And I think, I just came back from Nashville where there was a conference about public options. And I think, that's kind of a growing movement slowly. Like, for example, in insulin, you mentioned insulin. Like the state of California is now going to manufacture its own insulin. And I think these are some of the options that finally are coming to the table, because the cost that Americans have to bear for their pricing. I mean, imagine 34 million Americans know someone who couldn't afford to fill their prescription or died as a result. This is the richest country in the world. Just imagine that.
Well, we have another comment and that is here. There is no formulary for doctors to use when prescribing for patients. I mean, I'm not sure I understand the question, but I think it's, I agree with what she says. I agree with Tahir's views. I mean, you have the doctors who prescribe, the non-generic medication, because of course they're more expensive versus the generic medication. But if the governments can regulate certain industries, like the utility companies in the US, right? Or why can't they regulate the pharma companies? I mean, that's the $1 million question, isn't it?
Well, it's more than $1 million. If you look at
the $1 billion question.
Well, if you look at how much the drug companies spend on lobbying, I think it's something in the region. It was over 300 million. It was in the millions, significant millions. And I think that is part of the problem. Is we have to change how the lobbying system works and how the pharmaceutical industry. I mean, I don't know if that will ever go away in the United States or in any country, but the thing is that they have huge sway in terms of how policies are made. I mean, the Inflation Reduction Act doesn't solve all the problems. It's a movement in the right direction, but you can bet as they now do the implementing guidelines, and I know this because I speak with people at CMS, the body that's tasked with bringing this in. The pharmaceutical companies are already getting ready to litigate on what those rules will be. So
they've got a heavy war chest. I mean, that's
right. And why do they have a heavy war chest?
Because they make so much money.
$114 billion. And so we're giving them the power to then take away the power that the governments want to use to try and rein in drug prices. It's absurd.
I don't know how lobbying works in Europe, but I know in the US it's huge business.
So in Europe too. I mean, in Brussels mainly, where we're now at the moment reviewing the European pharmaceutical legislation, there is a lot of lobbying, but the consumer activists are also lobbying. So the new legislation that came out has some things that are good for industry, but some others that are good for patients now. And I think is important is that in Europe we respect human rights. We respect actually that patients, when they need a product, they should get access to it. The countries can individually decide whether they will reimburse them or not, but most countries will then actually say, well, if there is a good evidence that this product works and the patient needs it, then we'll make sure that the patients will get it. Now,
they argue in a number of pharma company websites. They say, if you can't afford the medicine, link here, and you can perhaps qualify to get the medicine for free or at a significantly reduced cost. How bona fide is that?
if you're too poor to pay for it, then you can beg and actually get it for free. Now that actually keeps the system going. I don't think we should. I mean, it's used in Europe only to allow for medicines to be accessed before the product has actually been registered or approved. Then the company is not allowed to sell it, and then you have to give it for free. Okay, you can't be against giving a medicines for free. What we really want, we want a fair price for everybody, and a system that actually allows industry to have a decent profit, not an excessive profit. And that's, I think, what's at stake in Europe at the moment. That we actually are getting, the system is out of hand, it's out of control, and there are now 3 products that have been refused by the government to be put in the national formulary. You can say that. There's actually hundreds of them more coming. The new gene therapies, the personalized medicine will be smaller numbers. The prices will be much higher for those, and the government actually has to get a new system that allows us to actually negotiate a fair price rather than dramatically increased excessive price.
Well, Tahir, if the drug companies are making so much money, why do they advertise?
Why do they advertise? I mean, that's why they make so much money.
I know, but they're not it's the doctor prescribing the medicine, right? Yeah. So you're advertising to an indirect market. I think maybe it's more brand recognition. Why does Coke advertise? You're not going to go out and buy a Coke when you see a Coke commercial, but it indoctrinates the brand with you, I guess.
Yeah, it's an interesting one because I think there's only 2 countries in the world that actually allow sort of direct-to-consumer advertising in terms of the TV things. That's New Zealand and the United States. Nowhere else in the world that I'm aware of actually allows it. I'm surprised even New Zealand allows it. But in a way, it's like basically it's a great human psychological sort of trick. It's like basically you're watching TV. I mean, every other advert, if you're watching a cable news channel in the United States, and it's like every other advert is a drug advert. So basically, it's like, what you're going to say. You're going to go to your physician and say, "I want that drug."
It's almost like the pharmacy or the drug commercials replace the cigarette commercials.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, the New York Times a couple of years ago, 3 years ago, actually wrote to the editorial board, said, "Is it time to give the pharmaceutical companies their tobacco moment?" And I think that's a really important conversation because it's not to say that, health, obviously outcomes are different. This is the reason why it's so hard and challenging to take on the pharmaceutical industry, because they are doing a service to society by bringing these medications and helping people live easier lives if they've got chronic illnesses and what have you. But the thing is, though, they can't play God and just do whatever they want just as a result of that. That's like saying, I've got some goodwill and now I'm going to abuse it.
Well, that's true. There's a class action suit that started in the U.S. Tamir, can you tell us a little bit about that class action suits, about whom they're overpricing?
That one, yeah. I mean, there's been a few class action lawsuits, but the problem is often these actually get thrown out. I think that one class action, so I think it was in Baltimore. I think it was. I don't think it's actually made any traction because the problem is in the US courts is, if it's overpriced, those arguments don't hold water. We've seen this numerous times, with HIV drugs, and I think it was AbbVie again, or Abbott as it was known, with the drug ritonavir lopinavir. There was a competition case. It was a lawsuit brought by patients. It didn't go anywhere. It's like you can't touch the private market here. It's basically it has to be something really outstandingly egregious that the courts will then have to sort of wade in on. But otherwise, as the laws stand, whether it be IP laws, whether it be antitrust laws, you're getting it, the teeth aren't there to cut it. There needs to be a revamping of these systems, because after 40 years of what I call runaway neoliberal policies, we're at a point now where we're at a breaking point. In fact, we were broken a while ago. It's now the question is how do you rein it back in?
almost like I say this with a lot of affection. You and Dr. Brandenburg are like Don Quixote, fighting, fighting the monsters, but there's a lot more. There's, the students at UCLA, Berkeley. I see that this is gaining some more traction than it has in the past. I agree with you, Dr. Brandenburg, and to hear that, it's hard, especially in the US, when we have such a capitalistic society, to file a lawsuit, no matter how you say it, how you plead the causes of action, say you can't make a lot of money. But I mean, even with the pandemic, I mean, the company's made billions and billions, right?
And with public taxpayer dollars, if you look at Moderna. I mean,
I've not paid for any COVID vaccinations,
Yeah.
not paid for any COVID tests.
Yeah.
So somebody's paying for it. I don't think that they're doing it for free.
No. I mean, well, the government sort of, the US government certainly subsidized a hell of a lot of the initial COVID response. I mean, Moderna was at least received over $1 billion for its R&D efforts. A lot of it was actually the earlier work on the mRNA vaccine was done in Pennsylvania University, which was public dollars. And yet Moderna is now going around saying that they're the true owner of mRNA vaccine technology. This is a problem in the United States, the NIH system. The NIH is probably the biggest funder of R&D in the world when it comes to medicines. They spend over $40 billion, but most of it ends up in private hands.
We have a comment from Lucas Vanderhoven. Says a large part of the population is poor and or illiterate. So how will you provide them with the knowledge on how to get cheap medicines?
Well, it depends a bit which country you talk to. I mean, in the Netherlands, where Lucas lives, also there is a solidarity system with an insurance system that if the product is actually in the basic package, everybody has access to it. But I think if you're talking about low and middle income countries, there's going to be even a bigger problem. I mean, if the Netherlands and the US now already have problems with the new drugs that are expensive, we actually need those medicines too in low and middle income countries. I worked in South Africa in the year 2000 when the AIDS epidemic was coming up, and we actually changed the system of the WHO model essential medicines list. Before then, it was only generics that we could afford. Since then, we've actually putting on all the new medicines that we really need in public health, even if they are patented or expensive. We put them on the list so that we can actually put pressure on the companies and show them, I mean, you have a duty of care for patients, not only in the US and Europe where you can make a lot of money, but also in lower middle income countries. And that has worked to an extent. There's now, I think, 70 or 80 patented medicines on that essential medicines list. And part of my previous work was to try and actually make sure that those medicines that are expensive in Europe at least can get cheaper in middle and low income countries. And some companies do actually also do some corporate social responsibility. I think Pfizer has announced that all their drugs will be at cost price delivered in the 43 lowest income countries. Just very curious to see how they're going to do that, because then we know the real price, the cost price of those medicines. And then we know also how much we overpay. So anyway, that will
be very telling. That will be very telling. There's somebody who wrote, I agree, Chris Sneed wrote, I believe people should make money. I have no problem. He says, I have no problem with that. But when a business is a 78% profit and people are dying from the inability to afford the product that could help, that is wrong.
Yeah.
So a government-backed competition program might help offset the pharma companies.
So now we had to go and ask this from an independent court in the Netherlands if that was actually enough, 53% excess profit. Mm-hmm. Now we had we are going to wait a couple of years before we get a final decision, but that will actually be a landmark case in the Netherlands. We've had similar cases before where we actually used human rights. There was against the government for climate change, the agenda case, and also the Shell versus the Milieu Defense, an environmental group versus Shell. So the courts are increasingly granting these type of requests because of the duty of care that companies have. And that's nothing new. There is a OECD, the Club of Rich Countries, has guidelines for multinational enterprises for 10 years already that companies should respect guidelines of the human rights. Drug companies say they are actually adhering to the principles, this business and human rights principles from the UN. Companies say they adhere to, but during Corona, when we really measured what they actually did in the development of the Corona vaccines, we could see that even Pfizer and Moderna were only reaching about 50% of their human rights obligations. So, and the problem is, at the moment, we can't go and take them to court on the basis of human rights. That is something now we also would like to try. And the OECD guidelines, when you implement them in national law, you could actually make them legally enforceable. So it is high time also that the US ratify this international convention on, what is it? Not a convention, that you respect human rights and that the state has a duty of care. Even that's not applicable in the US, I've been told. So here, please enlighten me.
Well, we have a comment that says, maybe we need to have, and this I'll throw to Utah here, maybe we need to have a better definition of what innovation is. In order to get a patent, and it should not be for tweaking products. That's from Fatima Suleiman.
Yeah, no, it's a great question, Fatima. It's so I do a fair bit of work on this, and it's something I'm sort of researching. And I think if we look historically, when the patent system started out, if we're just focusing on the patent system, because that's where the term innovation really sort of is used a lot, although it's used in public just anywhere really. But if you think about it, there's a difference between invention and innovation. These are two very different concepts, but they've been muddied deliberately because it's easier to kind of innovate. I mean, I'm not saying that in a sense, it's easier to get something for innovation because usually the upstream research has been done, the idea has for the first time been created, and then obviously you're going to commercialize it. I'm not saying it doesn't take some effort or time or investment or resources to commercialize something, but you're not really inventing something. And I think that's the difference here is we have a patent system now that is totally driven by innovation, and innovation can mean a million things. It's not necessarily about inventing anymore. And this is what I say, for me, if you think about the pillars of the standards for getting a patent, as I said before, it has to be new, novel, has to be non-obvious, you have to totally enable how you got the invention, and you have to have utility. Innovation for me is more utility, but it's not necessarily the other three. And I think that's how the system works now. So that's why you have so many more patents. If you think about it, it took 150 years for the USPTO, the US Patent and Trademark Office, to grant the first 5 million patents in the United States system. It took 30 years to grant the next 6 million. Did we become more inventive in the last 30 years?
I don't think so.
Why? Because of policy. The neoliberal policies made it easier to get a patent because they wanted to drive private capital. And that's what this is all about.
Well, we have something from Lucas that says Donald Light of Princeton wrote that COVID vaccine cost was about $1.25. It was sold for 15 euros, so 40 billion profit for Pfizer. And then we have another comment again from Chris Need. As a real estate developer, our government-sponsored programs that allow us to provide affordable housing, the cap is 18% profit for the project. That is enough to keep the business going, and it provides much needed housing. This model could be applied to any industry, but there's so much money to be made to adopt a model in pharma industry. Apparently, When is too much? When is it too much though? Interesting observation, Chris. And what is ICESCR? Rosalind
That is
said to
the
Shannon.
international agreement on what human rights is based.
Well, I think that I think what you need to. Okay, she just said international convention on which the U.S. has signed but not ratified. There are a number of other treaties that the U.S. hasn't signed, like the Treaty on the Protection of the Rights of Kids. I don't believe the U.S. has still signed that. So the right to health is not binding on the government because the U.S. signed it but has not ratified it. We're coming to the hour, but I want give both of you. I think it's important that you give what's the mission statement of your group, and how it is that people can help or support, either through financial contributions or just being sympathetic, being on a mailing list. Doctor, we'll start with you. How can people listening to this thing support people who believe in what you're doing?
Well, we have a website, pharmaceuticalaccountability.org. Maybe my colleague Rosalind can type it in the chat. We have actually our lawsuit for AbbVie is there, both in English and in Dutch, so you can actually read what we're asking the courts. We've got already traction in Belgium. They also asked if they could start a similar case there, and we discussed yesterday or the day before with the US lawyers also doing this multi-claim course. So basically, we'd like to actually promote using legal procedures if drug companies actually make just too much profit. The courts cannot say how much is enough. That is a political decision, but the courts can say that AbbVie has overdone its profits, and that has been hurting indirectly then patients through displacement of care, and they've broken their human rights obligations. So what we want is legal change, a fair pricing system, transparency, legally enforced, and also the human rights obligations of pharmaceutical companies enforceable by law. If that is happening, then we can actually negotiate better with the drug companies when they bring their useful new products to the market. So, of course, people can support us by replicating our messages, but also support us online. There's a donation button on our website. But I think the more important thing is that be aware of what's happening and actually try and also raise the same question in your country and see if your legal system allows it to actually stop when the profits get too high. I mean, Lucas said just now about corona vaccines. If we've taken Humira on because we had good data for it, but now we could have taken Pfizer on, of course, which they made even more profits on the corona vaccines, and they were refusing to actually share the knowledge and the skills and the IP with companies in lower middle income countries, which had much more capacity to actually produce. And that's, as a result, the world actually was longer in corona than needed. But this is also not only the fault of the industry, but also the rich countries which wanted to have the vaccines first. So anyway, enough
also said
to
the
do.
FDA and EMA should calculate the cost prices and publish them in public, and then PVV, I don't know who that is, like Vietnam does. Tahir, tell us about your mission statement and what can people do in the United States to support your cause?
Well, our mission statement really is to build a more just and equitable medicine system, and I think that's both here in the United States and globally. I mean, we're all connected in that sense when you think about what happened with COVID. I think, first of all, it's really just get yourself educated, and this is a great, this panel here is a great sort of example of how people can learn about these issues. I imagine the people on this are very well informed already, but it's like taking the message out and popularizing it further. I think there's a lot of information out there and there's a lot of disinformation. And it's up to until we can popularize this issue to a level that you get a larger public movement, which is happening, as you said, Rudy. It is slowly happening, even in the US. People are fed up with the way the system is working, but they don't know what to do. And here, for people in the US, what I say is speak to your representatives, speak to your people, even though they may be being lobbied by the pharmaceutical companies. The more they start hearing from their constituents, the more they have to start doing something, because they cannot ignore the people who vote for them. And I think, if what power we have in a democratic system, if you live in a democratic system, is use the power that you have to kind of either keep these elected representatives in or not. So at least leverage that. We do have a donate button on our website, but for us, it's like we have all our materials available free on it's www.i-mak.org. We welcome people to use it, to circulate it, to use it in whatever forums that you're working on these issues, if you are, or to share it with people who may want to learn about it. So it's all about spreading the message, really.
I agree. I want to thank all the listeners on LinkedIn who tuned in. I'm going to stop the live stream now, and don't forget to subscribe and like me on YouTube, Conversations with Rudy Rivera, and go ahead and connect with me on LinkedIn. Don't forget, you are watching Conversations with Rudy Rivera.